This is RTP. This is RTP180.
Thank you. I had a marketing class in college, and my suite mate, who's still a good friend of mine to this day, I was getting him to help me with a presentation. We had to do a pitch on an idea, and I said, I only have 5 minutes. And he said, Pat Young, you can't explain how to open a jar of mayonnaise in less than 5 minutes. And I thought to myself, what a weird way to insult me, but it stuck with me. But it stuck with me all these many years later, so I've worked very hard on being sharp, being seen, and being seated. And I hope I succeed tonight. Also, real quick, this picture is in Raleigh. My ex-wife lives in Raleigh. I live in Durham, and my kids are bi-coastal, if you consider Falls Lake and Jordan Lake coasts. And that's what I tell them to do. So 5 trends in Durham demographics. We have seen a lot of changes in Durham. We are about to kick off a new comprehensive plan which looks at a 30-year vision for our community. The last one was in 2005, which in the planning world is not that long ago, but it's another lifetime in Durham in terms of what we've seen change. So I'm going to go over 5 key changes. The first one is growth, population growth, relentless population growth. 16 people a day for about 30 years. We've seen about 40,000 people, 485 people a month, and 5,822 a year on average since 2010. So we've had about 40,000 people move to Durham since 2010. The top line is the county, the bottom line is the city. The unincorporated county outside of the city limits has very poor soils. We also have land use restrictions that limit the size of lots and the types of development that can occur because it's in our water supply watersheds, Lake into Lake Mickey in the north part of the community. So about 90% of our population is in the city, and we think that's going to continue. So we're projecting to get about another 140,000 people in Durham through our planning period, which is through 2045. And that's based on some of our local assessments and the state demographer, as well as the U.S. Census Bureau. So this is very consequential in a lot of ways, and probably a lot of obvious ways, such as having to get more fire trucks and more police officers and more solid waste vehicles. But Durham, as many of you will know and recall, I see a few people older than me out here, Durham went through a significant period of disinvestment. Our economy changed over completely from textiles and manufacturing to what it is today, kind of eds-meds technology. And that period of disinvestment led to us not always investing adequately in our roads, infrastructure, and services. So it's a challenge that we're up for, but it's one that's made more challenging by this phenomenon. It affects everything we do. We're excited to confront the challenge. It's a lot better than the opposite challenge, like the places Donna Reed talked about that are losing population. We're happy to have this challenge, but it sets a high bar for what we need to do over the next 30 years. Trend the second, where the population is occurring. That every one of those red dots is 100 people since 2011. Are the kind of, so the yellow background is the city limits and the white is Durham County. Durham is the only city in Durham County. I know Wake County has like 15, so it's nice to only have one. Makes it a little bit easier. We have seen a shift in our where our population is growing. Historically in Durham, we had a very kind of balanced growth between the north part of Durham and the south part of Durham. What we're seeing in the last decade is a huge influx of new growth in southeast Durham. When we did the 2005 comprehensive plan, I think that part of Durham was envisioned as what it had always been, which was semi-rural, large lots, a lot of farms, a lot of light industrial. We have seen explosive growth. I'll talk a little bit later about our senior population. The majority of new single-family houses in Durham since 2010 have been age-restricted senior housing. And the vast majority of that has been in this part of the community. And for those of you familiar with the area, this is adjacent to the Briar Creek development in Raleigh, which has been very, very successful, and we're seeing kind of spin-off growth from that, particularly in the senior segment. And then in downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods, we have seen enormous change and growth in not just our downtown, but in all the neighborhoods surrounding downtown. Many of those neighborhoods are historically stable, lower and middle income communities of color that are now seeing neighborhood change, often known as gentrification. And that is causing a lot of people, very understandably, people concerned about not being able to afford the neighborhoods they grew up in. So we are working very hard. The Durham's mayor, Steve Schewel, proposed a $95 million housing bond to go on the ballot this fall. We think that's likely to go on the ballot, and we'll see what happens. That will give us some additional resources in addition to federal funds and working with foundations and nonprofits to continue to identify affordable housing options. We're also working to look at ways that we can have more market affordable housing. Our department is currently in the middle of a project called Expanding Housing Choices that's focused on the idea of allowing things like accessory dwelling units, townhouses, duplexes, and attached housing in areas where it's exclusively single-family zoning near downtown. As you might imagine, that is controversial, but we think it is absolutely necessary to accommodate the growing population we told you about a moment ago. So, oh God, already? I told you, see? I'll be quick. So, population 18 to 30, we've seen a significant increase, but between 30 and 39, we see kind of an out-migration of people. And in senior housing, senior population, we've seen a huge increase. So, and the senior population is expected to double through 2045. So, what we are seeing happening, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, is kind of a hollowing out of our population cohorts, where that kind of late 20s to early 50s is very flat. Children under 17 is very flat. 18 to 29 is growing, and then folks in their late 50s and through 80s are growing dramatically. Has tremendous implications for how we grow, what we invest in, what priorities we undertake. Our immigrant population is by far the highest in the region. We have 10% of our population is foreign-born, and almost 40% of our population is from born outside of North Carolina. That influences our priorities and our approach. And then the Latino population, last point, is now about 14% of our population. It was about 4% of our population in the year 2000. But as you can see from this graph, it has flattened out significantly. Most of that growth was between 2000 and 2010. What we're hearing and what we're seeing from talking to our Latino neighbors is the prices of housing have gotten accelerated so dramatically that the Latino population is getting priced out. So we see that population growth flattening and moving out to the counties adjacent to Durham. And then finally, the population, I mentioned this already, between ages 5 and 17 is really only grown by about 4,000, while our overall population has grown by 40,000. That's not a typical share of growth. It's somewhere in the range of half of what you would expect. So we see a lot of people with young children are not moving to Durham. So we have an ongoing conversation with our school system about how we can change both the performance of the school system and the perception of the school system, because we think it is important to have those middle income and middle-aged age cohorts to continue to invest in our schools and be our workforce for the future.